Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Gary Maynard? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case. I'll move to the timeline of the alleged crimes, then offer my analysis. Gary Maynard was born in 1964 and grew up not far from Columbus, Ohio. He would later claim that he was mistreated when he was young. 2 different people offended against him. He also said that his high level of intelligence translated into success in school. In 1992, he graduated from high school and went to college at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, where he earned a master's degree in political science. He then attended Stony Brook University in New York and earned a master's degree in theater history. So he had 2 master's degrees at this point. He would eventually earn a PhD in sociology. His dissertation was on the effect of neoliberal trade policies on global public health. Gary wanted to be a full-time tenured professor, but he struggled to find a position. In 2013, he interviewed at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. He was visibly anxious while performing a teaching demonstration, but was offered a full-time position. He was not happy with the leadership at the university, which is a fairly normal feeling that professors have. He started a relationship with a student named Satara Stratton, who at one time had a heroin problem. Gary functioned as her faculty advisor on a research project and spent a lot of time with her. She complained about him, saying that there was harassment of a sexual nature and he was supplying her with drugs. Gary denied any wrongdoing. He said that Satara never complained about him. Rather, it was people who were jealous of their relationship. The university was done with Gary. He was escorted off the campus by the police in November of 2014. Gary and Satara reconciled and moved to Columbus, Ohio, but not surprisingly, the relationship didn't work out too well. On May 7, 2015, Gary was arrested after witnesses reported that he choked Satara. He suggested that he never touched her in a violent way. They were only arguing very vociferously. Gary pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor and was sentenced to 60 days in jail, although most of the sentence was suspended. Satara left Gary, and in 2017, she died, possibly from a heroin overdose. Gary returned to his life of being an adjunct professor. He worked at a number of universities in various states like Pennsylvania and Michigan before being offered a 1-year position at Santa Clara University in California. He was hired to teach a number of classes starting in the fall of 2019, including the Sociology of Crime, Cultural Effects of Technology, and Organizational Diversity. He moved to nearby San Jose in the summer of 2019 and rented a guest room in a house owned by a recently divorced woman named Kate. She felt as though he was anxious and unusual, but eventually they started a romantic relationship. In response to the pandemic in the spring of 2020, Gary's courses were moved online. He was now in the guest room of Kate's house pretty much all the time. Kate noticed some unusual behavior. Gary would yell at himself when reading the news. He installed surveillance cameras in the house, not on the exterior, but in the interior. And he put coverings over the windows so the room was dark all the time. Kate asked him to seek mental health counseling and was concerned for his well-being. After he damaged his room with a hammer, she had enough and asked him to leave. Because of the changes in tenant rights during the pandemic, it would have been difficult for Kate to evict Gary, so essentially she had to bribe him to get him to leave. She gave him a Toyota SUV and about $3,000 in cash. Gary took the deal and moved out. He would later sue Kate in small claims court, but the case was dismissed. Gary continued teaching online from wherever he could, including motel rooms and campsites. He traveled up and down the West Coast. At this time, there were a number of wildfires in California and Oregon. Gary appeared to be fascinated with them and would frequently drive to where they were and observe them. He didn't seem to be too worried about the burning to death part. During this time, his Toyota SUV broke down and he purchased a Kia hatchback. Now moving to the timeline of the alleged crimes. On July 19, 2021, at 9:45 a.m., a mountain biker stumbled upon a small brush fire on the western slope of Mount Shasta. Another biker joined him, and they managed to control the fire by stomping on the flames until firefighters could arrive. Investigators noticed 2 cars were in the area. One was Gary's Kia. It was stuck in a rut. Gary was working to free it and appeared to be agitated and incoherent. Investigators wrote down his license plate. Another fire was spotted on July 21, just before 3 a.m., along the same road. Investigators returned to the site of the first fire, the one that occurred on July 19, and noticed that the Kia was gone, but the other car was still there. The owner of the other car said that Gary had been waving a knife. When investigators walked over to where Gary's car had been stuck, they found pieces of burned newspaper and a pile of charred sticks. In August, investigators attached a tracking device to Gary's vehicle. He kept traveling to secluded areas in the woods. When he would leave an area, a fire would be spotted there. Gary was arrested on August 7, 2021. He was indicted in November on 4 counts of arson to federal property. The police were able to gain access to Gary's cell phone. He had some videos recorded on the phone that didn't look too good for him. One featured him threatening a homeowner because they had installed a gate. Apparently this prevented Gary from going where he wanted to. Gary said, "I'll just burn this to the ground. That's what you win. You win a wildfire right in your house." The video then captured a sound consistent with Gary striking a match. The second video captured Gary in his vehicle pursuing another vehicle containing a mother and her 3 children. When she pulled into a police station, Gary screamed that he would kill her family. At the time making this video, Gary is still incarcerated and facing charges. He has denied committing arson and looks forward to resuming his academic career after he is exonerated. He may have a very long wait to achieve his goal. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few items that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. Gary indicated that he has never received mental health counseling, but he diagnosed himself as having autism spectrum disorder. He said he was not a narcissist. He also said, quote, "I am more adept at understanding humans and society and reading emotions than almost anyone on earth," unquote. It doesn't appear as though he's making the best case for not being narcissistic. Item number 2, Gary has a number of interests which have attracted some attention. He wrote a series of articles suggesting that the notorious cult leader Jim Jones had symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder. Gary was fascinated with David Koresh from the 1993 disaster in Waco, Texas. David was the leader of the Branch Davidians. Gary once spent a year in the archives of Edgar Cayce, a self-proclaimed psychic who became known as the Sleeping Prophet. Gary was interested in Edgar's visions of the lost island of Atlantis. Gary was highly interested in conspiracy theories, cults, the paranormal, and the British royal family. He claimed that he was going to make some type of documentary containing conspiracy theories about Donald Trump. Gary said the documentary will prove that he, meaning Gary, was just playing a deranged character and is not guilty of any crimes. Gary claimed to be a criminologist and indicated he doesn't fit the profile of someone who would commit arson. Item number 3. Gary appears to possess a number of bizarre beliefs. He suggested that he felt empathically connected to trees. They were conscious beings, and he could never hurt them. He wished they could serve on a jury because they would acquit him. Gary probably could talk the bark off of a tree, but if he thinks that 12 trees would find him not guilty, he can't see the forest for the trees. When Gary was near the wildfires, he told Kate that God called him to walk on unstable and uneven ground. Gary regularly talked to spirits of the dead in his jail cell, including Satara Stratton. Again, she was his love interest who died in 2017. Gary said that River Phoenix was also there in his cell. I guess this makes sense. I can picture Gary saying, "I wish I had someone here who would stand by me." Gary was not happy with jail. He referred to it as a demonic hellhole. I'm glad he clarified that the hellhole was demonic and not one of those angelic hellholes. Gary's harsh review of the conditions while incarcerated may lead some people to believe that he's only going to leave a 1-star review for the jail. But for a jail, demonic hellhole was probably more consistent with a 3-star review. Item number 4, Gary's profile does not align very well with the typical characteristics of arson offenders. A few examples. A typical arson offender is unemployed. Gary had several jobs. They have a low level of education. Gary had a very high level of education. They tend to be physically unattractive. Some people, including Kate, found Gary to be attractive. They are low in assertiveness. Gary appeared to be reasonably assertive. Certain mental disorders are overrepresented among arson offenders, including schizophrenia, substance use disorders, and personality disorders. Gary claimed that he had autism spectrum disorder, but he made no mention of other disorders. Even though Gary doesn't fit with the profile well, there are some similarities between his behavior and the typical arson offender profile. For example, Gary often lived alone, he may have had low extroversion, and he was not married. There is this idea that perhaps Gary had something like pyromania. There's no way to know for sure if he did or didn't, but pyromania is uncommon even among those who repeatedly commit arson. Therefore, it seems unlikely. Item number 5. One interesting aspect of this case is how it highlights different aspects of life as an adjunct professor compared to a full-time professor. When people think of an instructor teaching a college course, they often envision a full-time, tenured professor who really doesn't have to work hard and who can pretty much say and do whatever they want without being fired. The reality of higher education is much different, as illustrated by Gary's experiences. Only about 24% of college faculty are full-time tenured professors. About 36% of faculty are full-time non-tenured track, so they will never be tenured no matter how long they stay at the college. The remaining 40% are part-time faculty. They are called adjunct professors. The salary range for a full-time professor is typically $60,000 to $100,000 per year. Adjunct professors earn an average of $3,000 per course. Most teach less than 10 courses per year, although some adjunct professors teach for multiple colleges at the same time. I've heard stories of professors teaching 20 or 25 courses a year. That's rare, but it does happen. For comparison, a full-time professor teaches somewhere between 5 and 8 courses a year. 31% of adjunct professors live at or below the poverty line. Many adjunct professors are hoping to get a full-time position. They keep teaching courses believing that one day they'll be recognized by a senior administrator and elevated to a full-time position. Colleges typically do a fairly good job at teaching students, but they do it in the worst way as far as the life of a professor. The professors who manage to get promoted to senior administrative positions are typically those who are agreeable enough to get along with the management philosophy of the college. They are typically not critical thinkers. They don't embody the essence of what a professor should be. That is, a person who is willing to stand up for their beliefs, make unpopular observations, and apply scientific thinking. Put another way, a person who is willing to promote academic freedom. With this in mind, colleges end up being managed by terrible leaders, which has resulted in a system of higher education that takes advantage of professors at every level. Regardless of tenure, any professor can be fired. Tenure is an interesting idea, but in practice it does not offer true job security. It does not protect academic freedom as it was originally intended. What's more, what little protection it does offer is only available to 24% of professors. Tying this narrative about higher education back to Gary's story, some students found that Gary was an articulate and brilliant professor with a great deal of intellectual curiosity. In addition, he was an easy grader, which is the fastest way to popularity as a professor and one of the keys to being selected as a senior administrator. Other students found his rants about celebrities and technology company executives to be bizarre. They questioned his mental health. I think the difficulty for Gary was not really his personality, rather having an inappropriate relationship with a student, being arrested for choking her, and of course, the allegations about setting fires. If Gary was seeking career advice in jail, he would probably hear something like, "Keep doing what you're doing, but try it with less arson." It appears as though somebody told Gary that he should set the world on fire with his teaching, and he took the remark literally. Those are my thoughts on Gary Maynard. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.